Why you've always felt like an outsider, even among the people. You can be sitting at a table full of people who have known you your entire life, surrounded by faces that have watched you grow up, and still feel, somewhere underneath your skin, like a guest who wandered into the wrong house. Nobody notices. You make sure of that. You laugh half a second after everyone else. You nod at the right moments. You answer the question about your week with the version that fits the room. And underneath the conversation, a quieter voice keeps saying the same thing it has said for years. They don't actually know this part of me. This is not about people who don't love you. Most of the time, they do. This is about something far more disorienting. The discovery that love and being understood are not the same experience, and that you can receive one for a lifetime while quietly starving for the other. If you have ever felt like an outsider in rooms where you were supposed to belong most, at the family table, inside your closest friendships, beside the person who shares your bed, this video will explain something you've never had language for. Not because something is wrong with you, because something happened early and repeatedly that taught you closeness was not safe. You learned to translate yourself before anyone could misread you, offering a version of your inner life that was easier for others to hold. And somewhere in that constant translation, the real you slipped further out of reach. Not just from them, but eventually, from yourself. What you are about to hear is not a story about bad relationships or broken families. It is the psychological architecture of feeling like a stranger among the people closest to you, and by the end you will understand exactly why it happened. There is a particular exhaustion in being fluent in everyone else's emotional language, while no one around you ever quite learned yours. You become an excellent reader of rooms, sensing a shift in tone before anyone speaks it, softening conversation before it tips into conflict, handing people exactly the version of you that keeps the peace. You become so good at it that no one realizes there is an entire person standing just behind the one they are talking to. This pattern did not begin recently, and it is not a personality flaw. It is the residue of a calculation your nervous system made over and over about how much of yourself was safe to show. Today, it feels like who you are. It isn't. And what follows will show you exactly where that calculation came from and what becomes possible the moment you stop performing closeness and start actually experiencing it. The smile that never reaches the right people. There is a specific kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. It is the tiredness of being around people for hours and somehow feeling more alone afterward than before you arrived. You showed up, you participated, you smiled at the right moments, and you left carrying the same ache you walked in with, now with a layer of performance fatigue on top of it. This is the paradox that confuses most people who live inside it. How can you feel lonely in a room full of people who clearly care about you? Loneliness, as most people define it, is the absence of company. But there is a second kind that has nothing to do with absence, the loneliness of presence without recognition. Think about the people who know the most facts about you, your job, your habits, your history, the shape of your daily routine. Now ask yourself a harder question. How many of them know what actually moves you? What you're afraid of when the lights go out? What question, if someone asked it sincerely, would make your chest tighten because no one has ever asked it before? For most people who feel like outsiders among their own people, the answer is unsettling. The closeness is real. The knowing is not. This gap creates a strange kind of performance, so well rehearsed it stops feeling like one. You learn which version of yourself gets met with warmth and which gets met with subtle discomfort. Over time, you stop offering the second version, not out of dishonesty, out of self-preservation. You learn, the way a hand learns to flinch from a hot surface, which parts of you are safe in which rooms. The smile becomes the evidence everyone uses to confirm you're fine. It reaches your face every time. It rarely reaches the part of you that actually needed someone to notice it wasn't quite real. And here is the question. This video exists to answer. If the people closest to you love you, why does the smile keep stopping there? Why does it never travel further inward no matter how long you've known each other? The answer isn't about them failing to look closely enough. It's about a confusion almost everyone in your life shares without realizing it. The assumption that closeness and being known are the same thing. They aren't. And the difference between them is exactly where this story begins. Why closeness was never the same as being known. Most people use the words interchangeably. Close, known, loved, as if they were three names for the same thing. They aren't. Closeness is built from time, from shared history, repeated proximity, the accumulated weight of years spent in the same rooms. It is what allows someone to finish your sentences or know which version of "I'm fine" means the opposite. Closeness is real, and it matters, and it is not nothing. Closeness measures exposure, not understanding. How much someone has seen of your life, not what they grasped of its cost. Being known is a different category. It requires someone to track not just what happened to you, but what it did to you internally. To sense the difference between you being tired and you being quietly overwhelmed. To ask the question underneath the question you actually asked. Here is the uncomfortable part. Most relationships, even decades-long ones, never cross from the first category into the second. People can know your entire timeline, every job, every move, every relationship, and still have no functional map of your inner world. They know the plot. They never learned the character. For people who grew up feeling like outsiders even inside their own families, this distinction explains a confusion that has followed them their entire life. Why does it feel lonely to be with people who technically know me best? It feels lonely because knowing facts about someone creates the illusion of intimacy without the harder skill real intimacy demands. The ability to sit with someone's internal experience without trying to fix it, minimize it, or redirect it toward something more comfortable. Most people were never taught that skill. So when you offered them your internal world, your fears, your specific kind of exhaustion, the strange way your mind works, they responded with the only tool they had: facts, advice, reassurance, deflection. Not because they didn't care, because no one ever taught them how to receive a person, only how to receive information about a person. And here is what almost no one explains. You didn't just notice this mismatch once and move on. You noticed it dozens of times until your nervous system started doing something about it on its own, long before you consciously chose to. The moment you learned to translate yourself. It rarely happens in one dramatic event. That's part of why it's so hard to see clearly. It happens in hundreds of small, forgettable moments. A feeling shared too honestly and met with discomfort instead of curiosity. A need answered with impatience. A moment of sadness that made the room tense instead of soft. None of these were necessarily cruel. Most were ordinary, the kind of thing that happens in every family. But your nervous system was not grading them on intent. It was grading them on outcome. And the outcome, again and again, was the same. Showing the real thing made the moment worse, not better. So your mind did what every intelligent nervous system does when a behavior consistently produces a costly outcome. It adapted, quietly building an internal translation system, a filter that took your raw emotional experience and converted it into something more palatable before it reached your mouth. This is not the same as lying. Translation is subtler than that. You weren't inventing a false self. You were editing the true one down to a version that felt survivable to express. The fear became, "I'm just a little stressed." The loneliness became, "I'm just tired." The need to be truly seen became silence, because silence, unlike vulnerability, never seemed to make anyone uncomfortable. Here is the part almost no one tells you. This system did not stay confined to dangerous people. Once a skill like this becomes automatic, it doesn't selectively activate only around people who might misuse your honesty. It activates everywhere, with safe people, loving people, people who might actually have met you with the understanding you were translating away. That is the real cost of this adaptation. It protected you exactly when you needed it, but it never learned to turn itself off once the danger passed. It just kept running, in every room, with everyone, regardless of whether the original threat was still present. By the time you were old enough to consciously choose who deserved your honesty, the choosing had already been outsourced to a system installed years earlier, built for circumstances that no longer applied. And that program had one specific output it had been refining for years: a performance of belonging convincing enough that almost no one ever questioned it. How belonging became a performance you perfected. A good performance has one defining quality. The audience never realizes they're watching one. By adolescence or early adulthood, you had likely become exceptional at this. Not in a theatrical way, but in a quiet, almost invisible one. You learned to read a room within seconds of entering it. Which energy to bring to which group, which version of your humor landed, and which made people pull back slightly. You became fluent in the unspoken rules of belonging long before anyone taught them to you. But here is what almost never gets acknowledged. It requires constant internal monitoring. While others simply exist in a conversation, you are running two processes at once, participating and continuously auditing yourself within it. Is this too much? Too honest? Should I redirect now, make a joke to release the tension I just created? And vigilance, sustained long enough, stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like identity. I'm just good with people. I'm just easygoing. I'm just not a big sharer. These explanations feel true because the behavior has become automatic enough to no longer register as a strategy. It registers as personality. But strategy and personality produce a very different internal experience over time. Personality feels like rest. Strategy, no matter how well rehearsed, never fully stops requiring energy, because some part of you always remains slightly outside the moment, monitoring it, managing it, making sure it stays safe. This is why you can attend a warm, loving gathering with people who genuinely care about you and still come home strangely depleted, as if you had been working the entire time. You had been. The work was just invisible even to you, a performance so well rehearsed that the only person who never gets to relax during it is the one giving it. And there is one place where this performance has always been most demanding and most invisible, inside the family that was supposed to be the one place you never needed to perform at all. The family that loved you and still missed you. This is the chapter most people resist the longest because it requires holding two true things at once. Your family loved you, and your family still missed you. Not because they were cruel. In most cases, they loved you as much as they were capable of loving anyone, within the limits of what they themselves had been taught about emotional closeness. That last part is the key most people overlook. Love is not a single, uniform skill everyone possesses in equal measure. It is shaped, generation after generation, by what each family was equipped to offer. Some are fluent in physical care, in providing, in protecting, but were never taught the language of emotional attunement. They can keep you safe, fed, and stable for 18 years, and still never once ask what you're actually feeling underneath your, "I'm fine." If you grew up like this, you likely received real love through channels that didn't include the one you needed most. Discipline, provision, pride in your achievements, physical presence at every important event. All of that is real. None of it is nothing. But none of it taught you that your internal world, your fears, your sensitivities, was something safe to bring into the room. So you adapted. You became the easy child, the one who didn't add to anyone's plate. You learned to manage your own emotional weather quietly, because the people around you were either unequipped to help you carry it, or too consumed by their own unprocessed lives to notice you were carrying anything at all. This is the origin of a grief that rarely gets named, missing people who are still alive sitting right across the table from you. And here is what makes this disorienting. Because the love was real, you never gave yourself permission to name the gap. Naming it felt like betrayal, like complaining about people who by every visible measure did everything right. So instead of naming it, you adapted around it. And one of the places that adaptation went deepest was not in your mind. It was in your body. Why your nervous system learned to brace, not bond. Your nervous system has one job above all others. Keep you safe, not happy, not understood. Safe. In an environment where emotional exposure was consistently met with discomfort, dismissal, or distraction, your nervous system did exactly what it was designed to do. It started treating closeness the way it would any other repeated low-grade threat, not with panic but with chronic, quiet readiness. A subtle bracing that never fully switches off. even in rooms where nothing dangerous is happening. Here is the part almost no one explains clearly. Bonding and bracing use the same nervous system real estate, but they can't both run at full strength at once. Bonding requires your body to register safety deeply enough to let its guard down. Bracing requires continuous low-level scanning and a readiness to adjust the instant something shifts. If you grew up bracing more often than bonding, your body became skilled at the first state and underdeveloped in the second. Not because you're incapable of bonding, but because the circuitry for sustained safety never got enough repetition to become your default. This is why you can sit next to someone who loves you, in a moment that should feel peaceful, and still feel a faint hum of vigilance underneath it. Not fear, exactly. Something quieter. A low background process checking almost involuntarily, whether this is still safe, whether you need to adjust. And here is the cruelest part. It doesn't just protect you from people who might hurt you. It quietly filters out the people who wouldn't. Genuine warmth can register as suspicious, because your body has more practice with vigilance than it has with rest. Underneath all of this bracing, something else has been quietly happening. An internal accounting, deciding exactly who has earned access to the parts of you that still aren't braced at all. The quiet math of who gets the real you. You have never written this math down anywhere, but you have been calculating it your entire life. Every person who enters your world gets sorted, mostly without your conscious input, into tiers of access. One tier gets your humor and surface-level updates. Another gets a slightly more honest version, edited for length and intensity. And then there is the smallest tier, sometimes one person, sometimes no one at all, that gets the unfiltered version. The fear, the doubt, the parts of you that don't perform well. This sorting runs on evidence, not intention. What matters is what actually happened the handful of times you tried to show someone the real thing. Did their face stay open or flicker with discomfort? Did they sit with what you said or rush to fix it, minimize it, and change the subject? Your nervous system tracked every one of these moments with more precision than your conscious mind ever did, building a private ledger of exactly how much honesty each relationship could safely hold. This is why you might feel closer to someone you've known 6 months than to family you've known your whole life. Closeness is built on time. Access is built on evidence of safety, and evidence accumulates on its own timeline. Here is what makes this especially painful. The math often produces a result no one wants to admit. Sometimes the people you've known longest have earned the least access, not because you didn't give them chances, but because every chance taught your nervous system, gently but unmistakably, to give a little less next time. This isn't bitterness. It's pattern recognition, protecting you from repeating an old disappointment in a new relationship. But pattern recognition has a blind spot. It cannot distinguish between someone who would genuinely fail you again and someone who simply never got the chance to prove they wouldn't, because you stopped offering real access before they ever had the opportunity to show up differently. That blind spot is where this outsider identity stops being a memory of the past and starts becoming something far more permanent. How emotional mismatch becomes identity. There is a point where a pattern of behavior quietly crosses a line and becomes something far harder to question. Identity. Behavior feels changeable. Identity feels fixed. It stops sounding like, I learned to hide my feelings around certain people, and starts sounding like, I'm just a private person. The first is a strategy with an origin story. The second is a trait, seemingly without one. This shift happens gradually, the same way any skill becomes unconscious. At first, translating yourself was effortful, small, deliberate choices about what to share and what to withhold. But behavior repeated enough stops requiring conscious effort. It becomes automatic. And anything automatic enough starts to feel less like something you do, and more like something you simply are. This matters because identity is far harder to question than behavior. If hiding your feelings is something you're prone to in certain contexts, you might do it less. But if, I'm just not someone people really get, becomes part of how you understand yourself, you stop examining it. This is precisely why so many people who feel like outsiders never trace the feeling back to its origin. It no longer presents itself as a memory of specific moments. It presents itself as a permanent truth about your nature. "I've just always been like this. I've never really fit in anywhere." Some of that might be true. Sensitivity and depth can be genuine traits, not just adaptations. But the part that says you don't deserve real understanding from people closest to you is not a trait. It's a conclusion drawn from mismatched relationships, generalized far beyond the evidence that originally produced it. And once that conclusion calcifies into identity, it stops just describing your past. It starts actively shaping every relationship you walk into next. The outsider you became to survive closeness. Here is the reframe this video has been building toward, and it will feel uncomfortable at first. What if the outsider feeling was never a failure to belong? What if it was a successful adaptation to an environment that didn't know how to receive the real you? Sit with that because it changes the entire emotional shape of this story. A child who learns to translate their feelings before expressing them is not broken. That child is resourceful enough to notice accurately that the people around them couldn't hold certain truths, and to adjust in order to preserve the relationship rather than risk losing it. That isn't dysfunction. It's a sophisticated form of self-protection, executed by someone too young to have other tools available. The outsider identity you've carried, then, was never really about being unlovable, unworthy, or fundamentally different in some flawed way. It was a protective architecture, built by a perceptive nervous system to keep you safe inside relationships that didn't have the capacity to meet your full emotional reality. This reframe matters because of what it changes about the next question. If this was never a flaw, why does it still feel so heavy? Why does a strategy that once protected you now feel like the very thing keeping you isolated? The answer lies in something true of almost every protective adaptation. It is built for a specific environment, and it rarely updates once that environment changes. The bracing that kept you safe at 8 doesn't pause to check whether the people in front of you at 28 or 48 are capable of something different. It just keeps running the original program because no one ever taught it that the danger had a shelf life. This is the precise moment where protection quietly becomes confinement, when a strategy that once expanded your safety begins instead to shrink your access to real connection. And once you can see that distinction, protection versus confinement, a far more important question becomes possible. What exactly was this pattern protecting you from feeling all this time? Why being seen felt more dangerous than being alone? This is the part that sounds backwards until you understand the logic underneath it. For many people who feel like outsiders, being truly seen is not experienced as relief. It's experienced as exposure. That sounds strange, because being seen is supposedly what we all want. But being seen by someone who has already shown they can't hold what they find isn't relief. It's risk. Your nervous system, having learned this early and repeatedly, generalized it into a quiet rule. Visibility is not safety. Visibility is vulnerability. And vulnerability, historically, has cost you more than it's given you. Aloneness, by contrast, is predictable. It doesn't require you to gamble on someone else's capacity to respond well. It cannot disappoint you the way being misunderstood by someone you love can. This is why many people who deeply crave closeness simultaneously sabotage it the moment it gets close enough to deliver, pulling back right when a relationship starts asking for more honesty, more depth, more access. It isn't fear of connection itself. It's fear of a familiar pain, offering your real self and discovering again that it wasn't fully received. It is often safer to be alone by choice than to be alone while standing right next to someone. The second kind, being physically present but emotionally unmet, is the one that originated this entire pattern. So you may have started preferring literal solitude over that specific kind of company, because solitude at least is honest about what it is. This explains a contradiction that confuses many outsiders about themselves: the genuine desire for deep connection and the quiet relief when a relationship doesn't ask too much of you. Both come from the same place: a nervous system trying to minimize the risk of repeating an old wound, even while a deeper part of you continues longing for exactly what that wound makes feel dangerous. Understanding this is the first step toward loosening its grip. But there's a deeper layer still, what this pattern has actually been costing you every day in relationships that could have been different. The cost of belonging to people who never ask to know you. There is a cost to this pattern that rarely gets counted because it doesn't show up as a single dramatic loss. It shows up as a slow, ongoing tax on your energy and your capacity to believe that real connection is even possible. Every interaction where you translate yourself instead of expressing yourself costs something. Not much in any single moment, but multiplied across years, across every gathering where you managed yourself instead of simply existing, it adds up to an enormous invisible depletion. You have likely spent more energy maintaining the performance of belonging than most people spend on actual connection. This is the exhaustion that makes no sense from the outside. People assume social fatigue comes from too much interaction. For you, it comes from the strain of constant internal monitoring, staying slightly outside every moment to make sure it remains safe. You can leave a wonderful evening with people who love you and still feel hollowed out, because some part of you never actually got to attend it. There's a second cost, quieter but more corrosive. The slow erosion of your ability to trust your inner experience. When you spend years editing your feelings down to a version others can comfortably receive, you start losing clarity about what the unedited version even is. You stop knowing, in real time, what you actually feel before you've already adjusted it for the room. It doesn't just hide you from other people. Eventually, it starts hiding you from yourself. And there's a third cost, perhaps the most painful of all. The people you've protected through this pattern never got the chance to surprise you by responding better than you expected. You made the decision for them, based on old evidence, before they ever had the opportunity to prove they might have grown, changed, or simply been more capable than the version of them you encountered years ago. What were you actually protecting underneath all of this that felt worth such an ongoing cost? What you were actually protecting all along. Underneath every translated feeling, every managed conversation, there was one thing this entire system was built to protect, and it isn't what most people would guess. It wasn't your safety exactly. It was something more specific, your capacity to keep believing that connection was possible at all. Here is the logic, even though it never ran consciously. If you fully exposed your real self to the people closest to you and they failed to meet it, you would have to accept something devastating. That even the people who loved you most couldn't actually reach you. That conclusion, faced early in life, would have been unbearable for a child still dependent on those relationships for survival and identity. So your nervous system built a workaround. By controlling how much you exposed, you controlled how much you could be rejected. If they only met the edited version, their failure to understand you could be explained away. The translation wasn't only protecting you from their reactions, it was protecting your hope, preserving the possibility that real understanding might still exist somewhere, by never fully testing whether it existed with the people in front of you. This is a profoundly intelligent, if costly, strategy. It let you maintain relationships without confronting the most painful possible truth, that you might not be fully reachable by the very people you needed most. But strategies built to preserve hope have a hidden expiration problem. The longer you protect hope by avoiding the test, the further it drifts from reality. You start hoping for understanding from people you've never actually given a real chance to offer it. This is the quiet trap at the center of the outsider identity. It was built to protect your belief that you could be known, while simultaneously preventing you from ever finding out for certain. And once you see this, an entirely different question becomes available. What's the actual difference between being loved by these people and being understood by them? The difference between being loved and being understood. Love and understanding feel like they should travel together. In practice, they often don't, and learning to separate them is one of the most liberating shifts a person carrying this pattern can make. Love, at its most basic, is a commitment of care and presence. It can exist without full comprehension. A parent can love a child fiercely and still misread their inner world completely. Love is sincere and real, even when it's inaccurate. Understanding is a different skill entirely. It requires accurate perception, tracking not just that someone is struggling, but exactly how and why, and what response would actually help, rather than just feel like help. It demands attention, curiosity, and a willingness to sit with discomfort rather than resolve it quickly. Many people who love deeply were never taught this second skill, because no one modeled it for them either. This distinction matters enormously for anyone who has spent years quietly grieving a lack of understanding from people who undeniably love them. You are not wrong that something is missing. You're also not wrong that something real exists alongside the absence. Both things are true simultaneously, and most of your pain has come from being told, implicitly, that you have to choose one truth and discard the other. You can hold the reality that your family loves you and the reality that they have never fully understood you, without either fact canceling the other out. It's an accurate map of a complicated situation, one that finally stops asking you to pretend the love was enough or pretend it didn't exist at all. This distinction also opens a door the outsider identity has kept closed for years. The possibility that understanding, unlike love, can sometimes be taught and built, even later in a relationship, not guaranteed, but genuinely possible, in ways the old translated version of you never risked finding out. That possibility is fragile, and can be lost again if you return to the old pattern automatically, which raises the real danger hiding inside this story. The outsider identity rarely stays a memory. Left unexamined, it quietly becomes something far more permanent than that. How the outsider identity quietly becomes a cage. Every protective pattern shares the same dangerous property. It cannot tell on its own when it has stopped protecting you and started confining you instead. In the beginning, the outsider identity was functional. It kept you safe from repeated emotional mismatch, preserved relationships that might have otherwise broken under the weight of unmet vulnerability, and gave you a coherent explanation for pain that might otherwise have felt random and unbearable. As far as protective adaptations go, this one did its job well. But somewhere along the way, without a clear moment of transition, the identity stopped being something that happened to you and became something you actively maintained. You began curating evidence that confirmed it, noticing every moment someone failed to understand you, while discounting the moments, however small, when someone tried. You entered new relationships already braced for the same outcome, which made you subtly less available for understanding even when it was genuinely offered. This is how protection becomes prophecy. Once you believe you are someone who isn't truly known, you stop testing that belief and start confirming it. You hold back the version of yourself that might allow someone to know you, which guarantees they won't. Not because they couldn't have, but because they were never given the material to try. This is the cruelest mechanism inside the pattern. The very protection built to preserve your hope of being known eventually becomes the primary obstacle preventing it. The cage is the translation system still running on full alert, decades after the original threat disappeared, screening out exactly the kind of access that might finally prove the old conclusion wrong. Recognizing this is not an indictment of you. It's simply the natural life cycle of any unexamined protective pattern, built brilliantly for one set of circumstances, never updated for the next, eventually outliving its usefulness and becoming the very isolation it was designed to prevent. The cage was built well. That's precisely why it's been so hard to notice you were ever inside one. But cages, unlike the threats that justified them, can be examined. And the moment you can see the bars clearly enough to know they're there, something becomes possible. Actually testing whether the door was ever truly locked. The moment you stop translating and start existing. There is a moment, available to you right now and available again every day after this one, where the entire pattern can begin to loosen. Not through force, not through a single dramatic conversation, but through something quieter and more sustainable. Choosing, just once, to offer someone the untranslated version of a single moment. Not your entire history, not a confrontation, just one true sentence, spoken instead of edited. One real answer to "how are you?" instead of the version built to keep the room comfortable. One moment where you let the discomfort of being seen exist, instead of managing it away before anyone else even noticed it was there. This is how the cage actually opens. Not through grand gestures, but through small, repeated tests that slowly update a nervous system that has been running on old evidence for years. Each time you offer something real and the room doesn't collapse, each time someone receives your honesty with more capacity than you expected, your body collects new data the outsider identity was never built to anticipate. Some of these tests won't go perfectly. Some people genuinely will respond the way the old pattern predicted. That isn't proof the entire experiment failed. It's proof that some relationships simply weren't designed to hold the real you, which is different from proof that no relationship can. The goal was never to become someone who shares everything with everyone. That would simply be a different kind of self-abandonment. The goal is rebuilding your own internal permission to let the right people in, based on actual present-day evidence, rather than a decades-old conclusion that may no longer be true of anyone currently in your life. You are not broken. You were never simply an outsider by nature. You were a perceptive, intelligent person who adapted brilliantly to an environment that didn't know how to hold your depth, and who has been carrying that adaptation long after most of the rooms you walk into actually changed. The translation system kept you alive inside relationships that might have otherwise hurt you more. It did its job, but it was never meant to run forever, and it was never meant to be mistaken for who you actually are. Underneath all of it, there has always been someone who wanted, more than anything, to simply be known. Not managed, not performed for. Known. And that person has been waiting, patiently, for you to finally stop translating long enough to let them speak.